WP-Get Web Dev tutorials for all user levels. Alright, so following on from the tutorial I put up yesterday, which talked about using utility variables and utility classes in bricks, what I want to talk about today is using these same variables and classes using what is known as the BEM model, so the block element modifier model. I'm going to show you a way of doing that in bricks which makes absolute sense for keeping things consistent. And what I've got over here is a mock page, and explaining very quickly, there's actually some pretty good information if you search on Google for this, but BEM, block, is a dash separated class name. So in this example, service-block. Element is a block name, 2 underscores, and an element name with an example of service-block __ header. And the modifier, when needed, is the element, which I did not spell correctly, but that's not important. The element, ELEMENT, yep, plus the 2 dashes, the modifier name with an example being service-block __ header -- featured. So that would be for a featured item, what you want to happen with the header. So pretty straightforward. It's a really good way of keeping all of your naming conventions the same. So when you look at a class name, you know exactly what it's supposed to be used for and what it relates to. So for the -- featured here, it relates to a header element which is on a service block. So that's the reason for doing this, is consistency and readability when you come back to your code, when you're deciding what do I call this class, and instead of making some random thing up, using this methodology, it just makes sense. Right, so let's see how we'd use this. I'm going to work through this. It might be a little bit glitchy as I work through, so I'm just going to work it out as I go. So I've got a empty section here, and I've got a container. Right, so what I'm going to do is with my container, I'm going to call that my services block by adding a simple class up here. So it's going to be called a services block. Excuse the noise in the background, I've got cars and trucks going past. So I'm going to call this services block, just the same as I've put in my demo up here. And in that services block, I've got a container now called services block. I'm actually going to name that. Okay, go services block as a container. All right, that doesn't have to be a container. Now I'm going to get a div. I'm going to stick it inside that services block. I'm going to call that div my service block. So the difference here is my services block, the plural is my services, my service block is a single block. So there's a single block there, and I'm going to call that services block my service block. All right, so it's just going to be a straight service block. So this is the block level. So whether it's the container basically. So whether it's a section, a container, a div, or whatever you're using, it's the container that's going to contain the content that you want to have a unique class naming for. So this is a service block that I'm going to call it. Okay, and inside my service block, I'm going to put a header in there, a heading. I'm going to call that, actually that didn't go in there, put that inside there, and I'm going to call that my service block __ heading. Same as what I've got up here. Okay, I'm going to get a image, which I haven't put up in that description there. I'm going to put an image in there. Trouble with my drag and drop today. Can put an image in there, and I'm going to call that service block -- image. All right, and then I'm going to grab a rich text, chuck it in there. I'm going to call that my service block. Dash dash description. Okay, so I've got my class names already there. I haven't done the modifier yet. I'll come back to the modifier when we add a few more of these. Now, let's start looking at how we actually use these now. So my services block. Actually, what I'm going to do first, because I've already put the classes on all these, I'm just going to duplicate this here out a couple of times. And I've got these sitting on top of each other. Now, if I go back to my services block, which is a container, okay, I want to make sure in my context, I'm going to select my services block class so that I'm editing the class, not the element. And I'm going to go to my content. I'm going to make sure that the display is fixed, which it already is because it's a container. I'm then going to set the layout to a row. I'm going to allow it to wrap. And we're going to call the flex basis on the next one to fix this up. And that's pretty much all I want to do there. Now my columns and row gap. This is where we're going to use the variables that I created yesterday. Okay, so in here we've got some spacing variables. And let's say for my spacing, I want to use my responsive spacing medium. So I'm going to use SPRM. Copy that. I'm going to put that in as my variable for the columns. So VAR. And I'm going to use the same for the rows. Okay, so I've got some column and row spacing. Now, that's basically laying it out. It should be laying it on a row, but it's not because we have these too wide because of the text. So let's go down to the actual service block. And we want this to be a flex because we want to lay things out in it. We want it to be a single column, and we want to maybe align the cross-axis to the center so everything's aligned in the center. And we want to set our flex row and flex shrink to 1. And let's put a flex basis on that of say 20%. All right. Now that, oops, I've just realized I was editing the, not editing the class. That's a trip for this sort of stuff. So we want to actually go to the service block, make sure that's selected before we do any of this. So we want that to be a column, center, and we want flex grow and flex shrink to both be on. We want to set a flex basis of 20%, which means that it's going to calculate this based on it thinking it's about 20% wide. And I'll show you where that how that works when we actually start getting a few more of these in. So there we go. So now I've got a service block. So I've got my services block, which I've told is a horizontal row, which we're going to allow some wrapping on. We've got some column and row gap based on the variables, which we set in our yesterday tutorial. We've got a services block here, so we're on the class, where we'll set the direction to column, display to flex, and align everything to the center. And we haven't put any column or row gap on there yet. So let's say we want some row gap. Let's use a smaller gap for that. So I'm going to go for the spacing responsive small. So let's go row gap is var spacing responsive small. I've got a little bit of gap in there now. If you want that bigger, you can make that medium, large, however you want this to be. Let's make it actually the large, because we'll see how that looks when we go to different responsive sizes. Okay, so now we've got the spacing we want there. What else do we want on the block? We want to put some padding on it. So let's go to our layout, and what sort of padding do we want? Let's say we want, a medium padding. So let's go our spacing responsive medium. And we're going to link all those, and we're going to put that var. There we go. So we've got a medium padding in there, and let's stick a border on it. Border of let's make it 1 pixel all sides, 1 px. Make it a solid and make it our, I don't know, what do we got here? An accent color. Why not? All right, so I'm seeing something here already that I'm not liking, which is the boxes aren't all the same size. They're the same height. How do we fix that? We go to the section. Where is our services block? There we go. Go services block. We're editing the services block and we want to stretch the contents. Now we've got them all stretched. So here's the power of using this system, is that all we need to do is go from level to level and change the settings, and it changes everywhere that it's used. All right, so go back to our services block. I'm happy enough with that spacing and sizing. Now let's actually look at each individual one of these. So my services block heading. What size do we want that? We'll leave it as an H3. Let's say we want the font size on that to be one of our variable font sizes, for example. I'm not suggesting you do this, but this is just an idea. So let's look at the variable font size of being medium. So font size, responsive, medium. Or actually, let's use a clamp size. So we want to go from medium to large. Use that variable there. And in our font size, it is var. Here we go. So now we've got our font size changed there. And that's on our service block heading. Let's actually pick an image for this here so we can see something in here. Select an image, make that size, that image there. It doesn't need to be that large, maybe 300 by 300. Actually, we'll do the same on these others here. And this one here. Okay, so what am I not seeing here? I'm not seeing the spacing on that. So why am I not seeing the spacing? Here we go. So let's go to the service block. I'm on the service block. And in my style, in my layouts, I've got spacing there, but it's not visible here for some reason. Have I got the service block on there? I have. Service block. Service block. Maybe it's a bricks thing. Let's just refresh this page. No, so that's not applying there for some reason. Why is it not applying? Let's have a look at it. So if we go to my services block, here's my service block there. That's got the service block on it. Service block here. It's got the service block on it. Row gap is there. Display block. That's my problem. So it looks like I've accidentally, when I've selected this service block here, this is a bit of a trick. So if I'm not on anything here and I set that deflects, it's only setting it on that one element. That's a trick. So if I get rid of that, right? So now I don't have any of my flex properties on there because I didn't select the service block before I selected that. Now that I selected the service block and then I select flex on there, it now applies to all of the service blocks. So a bit of a trap with this is you've got to make sure when you're doing variables for BEM or any global classes or utility classes, you've got to make sure that you check for the class being orange up here before you set your settings, or you accidentally set them on the element, not on the class. So that's a bit of a learning trap there. All right, so that's that there. Now heading back to my headings, so I've already done those. Actually, let's change the color of those headings as well. Again, so I'm on the heading here. On the first block, I'm on the first heading. At the moment, if I go into my style and change my typography, I'm only going to change that heading. So I'm going to select my service block heading. Instead, I'm going to go into my heading and I'm going to change that to be my secondary color. Actually, that's pretty ugly. Make it my primary color. It's still ugly. Let's make it this accent color. All right, so now it's changed everywhere because I'm editing that class. So that starting to make sense as to why we do this. We, rather than putting the settings directly on the actual element, set them on the class. Okay, so now I've got a heading, I've got a image. So let's have a look at the image. I'm going to set this image by selecting the service block image. Okay, I'm going to set my layout on this to have a height of maybe 120 pixels, a width of 100%, we want to be full width, and it's all squished up. So we go back to our content and we set the object fit to cover so it's not squished anymore. Now every one of these, regardless of what size image we put in there, what the dimensions are, is going to be 120 pixels wide, 120 pixels high, and it's going to have the image centered as cover. In fact, I haven't done that. Yes, it is. It's defaulting to 50-50. You can put center, whatever you like. And that's going to be nice. Now let's have a look at the border. We go to the border. Let's stick a radius on that, maybe a 30 pixel radius. So link them and maybe do 30 px radius. Now a 30 pixel radius on all of these. All right. Now, okay, let's go to our rich text. Again, this is not selected, so if I change any settings here, for example, if I go into my typography and I set my center, it's only affected this one, the others haven't changed. But if I select the class, which is my service block, underscore description, and then center it, they all change because I'm selecting the class. Starting to make sense? All right. Now, so that's the block and the element modifiers. What about the, block and element naming? What about the modifiers? So let's say we've got a heading here and we want to have let's go to the second one actually. We want that to be featured. All right. Actually, let's do the entire service block. So if I go service block, so it's got a class of service block. I add a new one called service block. We're a service dash block, then dash featured. So meaning it's a service block is my class, dash is the modifier. So when it's featured, I want to do some things with it. So let's say when it's featured, I want to maybe, where's our layout? Maybe we're going to have a negative margin on it. So let's go top of minus 20, minus 2 REM. So I'm going to move this up by 2 pixels. 2 REM when it's featured. Right. So that's my featured block. And if we look at the block here, the service block here, I've got now two classes, my service block and my service block dash featured. If I look at the service block above that, it's only a service block, it's not featured. All right, let's go back to our featured one. So that's our featured one there. Let's look at the heading. What would this be? Service block underscore heading dash featured. Okay, and with that we would then say when it's got the heading with the service box heading featured, we want to change the color on that to make it, I don't know, what's the normal one? So we'll make that this will be ugly, but we'll make it that yellow color. So that's the featured color. All right, so that there is now, if I want this heading to be featured, let's say I come over to this heading over here and I want that to be featured, I just go down to my classes and I make that my service block heading featured. All right, so now I've got a heading and a heading featured. Right? You can also do this with utility classes where underneath the featured service block, that doesn't make sense, does it? When you've got a, you can have a featured item inside there, but not a featured block. Doesn't make sense in this particular case, but there are cases where it might. So let's go back to this service block here. You might have a service block featured, but then you want to actually access the items underneath that. I'm not sure if you can do that in bricks. So what do we do there? Well, we grab the name here. We've got a service blocks featured. Okay. So if I grab that and I head over to my code box, and I'm going to put in a new snippet for service boxes. Where you put this is up to you. If you put this inside all in the one CSS file, or you want to stick it into a utilities or a layout or whatever class, I'm just going to do it as a separate one for now. Save that and enable it. If I do a dot service blocks featured, right, and then I go back to here and I go, when a service box is featured, I want the heading, so this heading, grab that, I want that to be color green, as an example. I'm just going to tick this auto reload changes, which is not going to happen straight away. I didn't have it on there before. Control F5, oops. Save that. Control F5. Okay, now I've changed that one there. So if I get just this block here and I make that featured, that's moved that up, but it hasn't. Sorry, I messed that up. So the modifier is on the top. So it's a service block featured. We don't need the modifier there. And that should work. Okay, so if I grab this service block here and I make that featured, service block featured, and my heading didn't change for some reason, what is going on here? So, concepts there, so service box featured, and then service block heading, we want to be the color green. Let's see what color it actually is. Being overridden by the heading. Yeah, okay, so it's being overridden by the heading inside bricks. I've got a feeling that I've had this issue before where in the UI it's different than it is in the front end. So let's have a bit of a look at that. Yeah, so in the front end, it works. So when you do these, like here, they work. But in the back end, you can't see these because the bricks editor is overriding them with the classes that you can see here. So you'd have to make them more specific if you want to see these in the back end as well as the front end. But that's the idea. So you build out your class names using the block, the service block in the sample, your element with the service block, and then 2 underscores, and then a name, and then your modifier with what you want that to change when you add the modifier. And that could be hover, could be anything. So actually, let's have a look at that. This is an example here. So I've got a service box featured here. Let's put a service box. We've got service box featured selected. Let's add a hover style to it. So we're going to add a pseudo class of hover. And then on that style, we're going to add a box shadow of 0, 0, 15, px, and we'll make that a black. Put around the box there, and just drop the transparency a little bit. Okay, there we go. So save that. We got front end. Now when we hover over that, the featured one we get the box shadow on. The non-featured ones we don't get the box shadow on because we've applied that hover state to the service block featured class. So there's lots of ways you can do this. You can do it from the UI in Bricks. You can do it from your custom code in the back end here. Looking more at Bricks, there's a lot of stuff that you can do directly in here, and it just makes sense for me now as I'm working through this. Do as much as you can within Bricks using these classes, using the pseudo states, all that sort of stuff. And only if you can't do it in the UI, then head over to your CSS code editor and create some classes to do it based on that. But that makes complete sense to me. All right, now let's come back to here. I'm going to grab my last service block. I'm going to duplicate that. Okay, and I'm going to then duplicate it again. And you can see what's happened here. I've got these at, my flex bases on these are set at 20%, which means that 4 times 20% is 80%. That's taking into account the spacing as well here. But 5 times 20% is 100%. If you take into account the spacing, it's going to wrap the next one onto the next line. All right, so the flex basis gives you that. So if we want to change that, we just go to our services block, select the services block here, go to our content, and we've got a flex basis on a service block, I should say, not a services block. I've got a flex basis 20%. If I made that 30%, it's only going to fit 3 across, and then it's going to wrap the next 2 around. So that's a pretty cool way of doing this. That means it's not a grid, it's doing 100% of the width, but it's laying out what it can fit onto those. I've just noticed here I haven't got any row spacing. So if I go back to my services block, what have I got there? I haven't got any row gap. Why haven't I got any row gap? If I put that 20px, that's because of the way that it is, where are we, services block, I've got that stretching. So that's the reason the row gap's not working, I think. I do 20px and 20px. Would it be these two here? Let me just go back to the featured. Get rid of that. Service block featured. Rid of that. Was that minus margin which messed up the flex? So let's go back to the services block. The services block, plural. Probably should say that to container. Makes more sense now. Keep confusing me. Okay, so we go back to there, and we've got now our variable. Where are we? Let's make that a medium, spacing medium responsive. Okay, so we've got a medium spacing for row and column. On our service block, if we want more on the column, we can make that, say, 20%. We can make that 15% if we want more on that column, on that row, depending on how you want this to work. So if I make that, say, 30%, I'm pretty happy with the fact that it's wrapping at 3, and then it's got 2 on the next row. Now let's have a look at the front end. Okay, so there we are at the front end, our 3 across, 2 there, and we've got these ones are featured, so they got the hover effect. Let's have a look at what happens when we scale. Stick this on the right hand side. I'm going to look at my spacing here on one of these blocks. My spacing, my padding is 20. Remember, I'm using my responsive spacing. So watch my padding, 16. This is on the tablet breakpoint. Let's get down to a mobile. We've got 8. Okay, but in here I've got too many across. So let's go back to my services block. Select my services block here. We want to go to our mobile. And on our mobile, we want to set our flex basis to 100%. All right, so right across the page. Save that. Now we've got 100% across the page. Then we get to 3 across the page there, and it just expands. And we've got our responsive text happening in the header. We've got our proper spacing between our rows and columns, wrapping, filling 100%, and that's pretty much it. So it's a bit of a waffle as I work through this because I'm working it out as I go, but you get the point. By naming and using this convention, it makes a lot of sense. Do as much as you can in bricks using this UI, using the class system, using the pseudo hover active focus as modifiers, and do as much of that as you can in bricks. What you can't do in bricks, head over to your code editor and just add classes there using the same naming conventions as you used up over here. Right, so hopefully that makes sense, not too much of a waffle and something that you can use. Good luck.